All across the country, we're seeing people gather in small towns, at town halls, at rallies. Many of you have been part of that initiative, and we're all here on a Saturday morning because something woke us up, something motivated us, something inside of us said, I'm just not going to take it anymore. And any one of us could be up here sharing a few words with the rest of us, and I really appreciate the invitation to be here with you, to share with you what motivates me, a little bit about me and who I am, and why I'm just so appreciative that each and every one of you are willing to give up a small part of your life to do your part, to take it back and make sure that we're doing the right thing across America. So my story starts a little bit with my upbringing. My grandparents, like many of yours, maybe it's your great-grandparents though, grew up during the Great Depression. My grandfather, Celedon Luján, and my grandmother, Nestora Luján, they got married before New Mexico was a state while we were still a territory. My grandfather was a sheep porter. He used to leave the family to be able to go up into the mountain sheds there and move those sheep from New Mexico up into what we now call New Mexico into what we now call Colorado. My grandmother, she had the enormous responsibility of raising that family, of making sure that that family farm was getting the water and nourishment, and the kids were getting everything that they needed. My mom's side of the family, my grandfather, Luis Luján, he served in World War II. We know we share that stories and sentiment across the country and with many here today. Growing up, there wasn't much work in the community that I lived in. It's a small town about 20 miles north of our capital city of Santa Fe. My father would leave New Mexico with a lunch and his thumb and make it out to California, where one of his older brothers found some work in the shipyards out near Long Beach. Some of you from California know San Pedro, you know Southgate. That's where my New Mexico roots are also connected to. And so Dad would go work for a few months, save up enough money, and he was in love with this young woman by the name of Carmen Luján. They were high school sweethearts, and yes, they shared the same last name before they got married. They didn't change the names, if you will. They shared the name. Different families, Luján, Smith, you see the correlation as you travel across the country. But he'd make enough money to send money home, but he always made sure that my mom was going to have a special dress, whether it was for a Sunday service or for a family gathering. And that's how he kept her charmed, and he'd make that journey back home with a freshly packed lunch. And those thumbnails were a little cleaner when he started that journey than when he would finish. You know, that story inspired me growing up, because while my father also was an iron worker, and he learned those skills when he was out in those shipyards in California to bring them back home. At the same time, you'll remember that our nation was still looking at what we could do with building an industrial complex. And in this little town in New Mexico by the name of Los Alamos, we had a national laboratory by the name of Los Alamos. But it wasn't just physicists and scientists and engineers that kept that place running. It was people that had the ability to see those angles and put their touch on them and make sure that that steel would stick, so these buildings would get higher and higher. Now, those of us in New Mexico, we see a building that's 4 or 5 stories high. Those of you that come from the rest of America see that, and that's nothing, right? They're 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 stories tall. But it took people and commitment to make that still stick. So growing up, after my father was mumbling about one thing or another on the job, his brothers and sisters in the union, he was a union iron worker, told him, Ben, we're tired of hearing you complaining about this stuff. Why don't you go do something about it? So he thought, well, I can do that. I know how to organize. I'm part of this union. I can bring people together, and we can share some ideas about standing up to the injustices in these committees. So he got organized. He put together a campaign. He ran for office, and he lost. He didn't let that discourage him. He just kind of brushed it off and figured, well, I need to go find a few more 100 votes out there. I better start talking to more folks and continuing the organizing. The next election cycle, Dan ran for office, didn't look back. Got elected to the local county commission to change the world. Down through the ranks, he was never a guy that went after the media. He was a guy that was behind the scenes, but he knew that he had to learn the rules and learn how to speak that language. Dad's first language, like my grandma and grandpa, like my mom, was Spanish. They didn't grow up speaking English. And quite honestly, during his elementary school days, he was punished for speaking Spanish in the schools. They'd walk around with a ruler, they'd hit him on the back of the head, or they'd slap him on the hand. So mom and dad, growing up, they didn't want us necessarily speaking in Spanish because they didn't want us to get the handprint of what 10, 11, and 12 mean on a ruler to get stuck on our hand. So they would speak to us in English growing up, but what they didn't know is grandma and grandpa would speak to us in Spanish. So we got the best of these both worlds that came together. So Spanglish in our household was just part of the way that we spoke, right? It's how you connected. And especially when you needed to talk about familia y que mamá está haciendo with the chair in the corner and ¿qué pasó con tortilla? It's all burned and it's all black, right? It's a little toasted. It's how it all comes together. And I know it's improper, but it's who we are. And in the end, it's what taught me about family, about familia. And when I talk about familia, it's deeper than that family tie. And here, we're familia. You're a big family. You're intertwined and you're interconnected by whatever you have learned growing up. But let me get back to why I'm here today. That's not the entire story of why I'm here today. You see, when my father was working as an iron worker with his brothers and sisters, and he wasn't a smoker. He was exposed to things that he didn't even know that he was exposed to. You see, when Dad would get up and go to work with all that pride that Dad had, with the dignity of that paycheck and that pension and that retirement that he was going to have to take care of his family, we didn't know that Dad was getting poisoned on a daily basis. Because those worker protections that should have been put in place to keep Dad and those other iron workers safe weren't in place. You see, Dad got a raw deal. As I watched that cancer take over my dad when we learned that it was a stage 4 cancer that Dad had been diagnosed with, and we said, well, why? He wasn't a smoker. Dad didn't work in an area where it was even asbestos that could get him. What happened? He told us about some of his other fellow iron workers that were diagnosed with the same cancer, no smoking history. What the hell was going on? He deserved better. My dad passed a little more than 4.5 years ago, and my faith was shaken when Dad got diagnosed and when we lost my father. Now, I know that we all go through trials and tribulations, and when we see what's happening right now down in Houston in these small communities, what's happening in Florida, we shouldn't forget our brothers and sisters down in the parish in Louisiana, what happened with Superstorm Sandy, what's happening in the islands and around the world. Trials and tribulations are real, and sometimes we see them where we're not directly connected, but we can feel that. Your faith's also shaking when you lose that job, when you see that plant pack up and move away. Too many people across America have had their faith shaken. And they also feel like they got a raw deal, right? They feel like they've been ripped off day in and day out. And people like my father are finding that blue-collar jobs that their parents relied on are harder and harder to come by. And worse, those labor unions that once got together because people weren't getting paid enough and they were getting taken advantage of with their wages, or they wouldn't be able to even celebrate on the weekend with their family, or those safe working conditions that weren't in existence that took my father's life, they're under attack every day. And one of the first votes we took in Congress this year, which is where the politics and the policy matter. It matters who's in charge and who holds the gavel. You see, one of the first votes we had in Congress this year was a vote to peel back protections against exposure with beryllium. I'll let you guess one of the things that took my pop's life. Exposure to beryllium. And here there was a vote on the House floor. Does it expose other people to what my dad went through? It's just not right. But it doesn't stop there. So as you talk about the challenges that we have with those jobs around America, even if you make a good living, the cost of everything is skyrocketing, right? I'm talking about everyday expenses like prescription drugs and cable bills, airline tickets, and a visit to your grandparents at Christmas, and tuition bills for the kids. It's not an accident. Big corporations who can afford to buy a seat at the table have the game rigged. It's pretty simple. They get special tax loopholes so they don't have to pay their fair share. They take advantage of the system to build monopolies and stifle competition. And hardworking Americans wind up getting ripped off. So how many of you here are stuck in a cell phone contract that you want to get out of? Anyone here? Oh, come on now. I know there's more of you. I'm in one. Anyone here got charged an extra $50 to get a bag checked on the way out here? Well, anyone that put their eyes on the financial news might have seen that there's more baggage fees awaiting for you when you think you're getting a good deal on that ticket that got the economy fare. Not to mention that you just might get thrown off that flight because you found a bargain online. How about this one? Anyone here wear eyeglasses? I see a few of you that have them on today. Did you know that there's 2 companies in America that control a majority of the supply chain? There's one in the U.S. today that controls about 45% of the market, and guess what's coming up? A potential merger. You think paying more for your eyeglasses today than paying for your tablet makes you mad? You want to know why your notebooks are less than your eyeglasses? It's because they control the supply chain. When you don't unrig the system, it's wrong. And so when you talk about these concerns every day, think about the number of people across America, and there's some of us here in this room, when you talk about that busted furnace or that engine blowing because maybe you weren't doing what you should have been with that vehicle, what that means to the budget, it can throw people into bankruptcy. Remember that fight that we had over pre-existing conditions and lifetime caps when you got sick or had cancer or you got hurt on the job site and all of a sudden you might lose your home because you couldn't afford care? How many of you are still worried about college debt and have some debt to take care of on your own? You know, it just piles up, and you have to ask why nothing is happening. You talk about that compact in America that you're all working on, where policy intersects politics. We need your help. So, all of you in this room, you've been working hard. You're degreed up. I just have a bachelor's. I'm sure we have bachelors and PhDs and MBAs and JDs and MDs and whatever else we can try to find with the expertise in this room. You all are starting businesses today. You're curing cancer. You're running Fortune 500 companies. But yet many of you still find it hard to afford a home in the cities that you live in. If you're not able to get ahead, who is? So when we talk about that raw deal that my dad got with that story I told you, and we talk about that better deal that I know people are still mentioning around the country today, it's not just a slogan. You see, that's personal to me. It's personal to my mom. Enough with the ripoffs and enough with the raw deals. That's why we need you with the policy to make sure it's intersecting the politics. It's personal for everybody in the middle class who's getting squeezed from all sides by greedy corporations every time they open up their wallets. It's personal for blue-collar folks like my dad, who deserve to come home safe after a hard day's work. And it's personal to me. And I hope it's personal to you too. But the economy isn't just the only place where the American faith has been shaken, right? Look at the process. We talk about elections, we talk about Citizens United and outside secret money that's pouring on in. The faith of the American people has truly been shaken when it comes to losing faith in their elected leaders, in elections, in the process. And we have our work to do to make sure we restore that faith, to earn back their trust. But it doesn't just end there. Now we're seeing Donald Trump go out of his way to demonize lawful immigrants, trying to break the spirit of those who have brought these aspirations to our shores, wanting nothing more than to contribute to our country. We've seen him call for discriminating against refugees based on religion, telling our Muslim brothers and sisters fleeing horror and genocide that they're not welcome here. We've even seen him defend white supremacists, saying that some of them are good people. comparing their hatred and violence to the peaceful actions of African American protesters speaking out against injustice. So the President of the United States sending an unmistakable message to millions of our fellow Americans. You don't belong here, you don't matter here, and you don't count. Can't let that happen. That's why I'm here today. In the wake of the Great Depression, Democrats led the fight for Social Security so seniors could retire with dignity. After World War II, Democrats led the fight for the GI Bill, so that there'd be support for those young soldiers returning home. In the 60s, Democrats led the fight for Pell Grants and Medicare so that our society could provide more opportunity for the young and more security for the old. In the 1990s, Democrats led the fight for economic policies to create tens of millions of jobs. And in this century, Democrats led the fight for universal health care, and our work's not done. Led the fight for LGBTQ equality. And by the way, we have to fight to protect that whole list every day because someone's coming after it. Now we know we need to do more to make sure we push back against what we're seeing from this administration on climate change and global warming, to protect our air and water, to restore voting rights, to protect this franchise for all citizens. The fight to address the student debt crisis and protect the future young Americans who have worked so hard to build what we have today. The fight to hold Donald Trump accountable and protect the integrity of our democracy. You all understand the urgency of now. I'm not just asking you to follow in this fight. America is looking for new leaders. New leaders like David Crowley, who went from organizing in his community to helping run a campaign to representing his hometown of Milwaukee in the Wisconsin Assembly, all before the age of 31. New leaders like Brenda Lopez, who fights every day to protect the legal rights of immigrant families being targeted by the Trump administration. New leaders like Rendell Solomon, whose nonprofit is working to help economically disadvantaged youth because who are financially illiterate, so that we are able to correct that wrong. Because we don't teach that anymore in the schools, right? We don't tell each other how to balance our checkbook. Rendell's changing the world and donating shares of the company so that everyone that's being pulled in can start building the wealth on their own. David and Brenda Rendell are all here with us this weekend, and so are other countless bright leaders across America that we need in this fight. Now, you know I talked about the responsibility that I learned from my parents and grandparents and that work ethic that I got from that small farm. But millennials and young leaders, you feel it in your bones. Social responsibility is part of your DNA. You don't wait for people to come and ask you to try to fix something. When you see injustice, you stand up and you say, it's wrong, and I'm going to make sure that I'm doing my part to stand up to that garbage. And I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to bring an army with me to make a difference. I'm so envious of you. What took me getting up at 4 a.m. and feeding those animals on the farm most of my life, you just get. But we need more of you to choose politics as the place to make your mark on the world. You see, there are only 13 members of the House of Representatives who were born in 1980 or later. Has anyone ever told you you're too young or wait your turn? It's not your time. For some reason, people keep telling the young, smart, creative, socially responsible people that want to get into politics that it's not your time. Might surprise you, I heard that when I was running for Congress. Wait your turn. It's not your time. Heck, I was in my late 30s. They told me I was too young. This year we have 59 candidates running for the House under the age of 40. People like Dan McCready in North Carolina, who enlisted in the Marine Corps his freshman year of college in the days following 9/11, led 65 of his fellow Marines into combat in Iraq. Now he builds solar farms in North Carolina and employs hundreds of people. People like Jared Golden in Maine, only 35 years of age, but already served in Iraq and Afghanistan and served in the state legislature. People like Abby Finkenauer in Iowa. Abby ran for office and was elected at the age of 24, becoming the third youngest woman in the country to serve in the state legislature. But from day one, she hasn't been afraid to standing up for what she believes in and working families. That's only 3. We need 24 to get back into the majority. So I'm giving you a little bit of what my job is as chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. We need to build a new majority. A majority of veterans and scientists, of veterans and iron workers and laborers. You know, people told me once upon a time, well, Ben Ray, you keep talking about all these scientists and engineers and innovators and veterans and small business owners, but you're not talking about women. I said, well, it turns out women are veterans and small business owners and physicists and scientists and engineers and medical doctors in America. And if you looked at that slide deck that we put up on board of that little video, you saw the number of incredible women stepping up to this challenge. So what are you waiting for? That's what today's about. If you're young and you're passionate and you want to be a leader in this movement, I don't want to have to remind you that you don't need permission. But if you really need and feel like you need to be asked, then I'm asking. If there's a great candidate where you live, then get to know them. See what they stand for. Help them out. But if there's not, put your name on the dotted line. Sign up. Get ready to run for office yourself, because I know I'm doing my part to take it back, and I'm asking you to do yours. We need you to stand up. We need you to be disruptive. We need you to be innovative, and we need you to shake things at their core. If we all do our part, whether it's putting our name on the ballot or learning to run a campaign or helping out in your spare time, we can do something great next November. We can restore some checks and balances in our democracy. Our country's in a tough spot right now, but we've been here before. You know the history. I don't have to repeat it. The way that we talk about how we all came together in those days following 9/11. The way your parents might talk to you about the civil rights and voting rights struggle in the 1960s. The way that I'm honored to hear the story from a great civil rights leader and congressman by the name of John Lewis, when he shares with us what he can remember when he bled and almost lost his life crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. John's fight was all about helping our nation find its conscience, learn our history, make sure that we celebrate the best of what it shares with us, but that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. But I know that I'm not telling you something that you're not doing on your own already, right? You marched in the streets the day after the inauguration. You marched to the airports when President announced that Muslim ban. You marched to rallies in defense of our dreamers. Young Americans, you've been at this from day one, and we need you to keep marching. I'm inviting you and asking you to be part of our march into 2018, because we need your help to take it back. Take it back for every young child across the world who is hoping that this can be her land of opportunity. Take it back for everyone who's lost faith, and show them that the American dream is alive and well, and that we have their backs. So we have a big job in front of us. But if we stand together, if we fight together, we can, we must, and we will take it back. Thanks for having me today, everybody.